just because someone does a horrendous crime, that actually they have a story too, or there might be a reason behind it. There's something that's caused them to do it. They're not just evil, as he says here.
Exactly. Just what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to share it?
Yeah. So before I did it, no, I'm glad you brought this up because anyway. So I did it. I think I'm quite empathetic. I think I was. So I'm doing this thing now, and I'm like.
1% of the population are type N, narcissistic, and he talks about James. And when I was reading this section, it made me mad because I'm like, you entitled little, that's what I thought, you entitled little.
The one that got me from that though, more so, was when he talks about when two chimps have had a fight.
Yes.
And then the one that loses, other ones go to comfort them or try and help them lick their wounds and stuff like that. So that seems, I mean, you can argue both.
Welcome to the Power of Pages, and we review books that ignite your mind,
elevate your life,
and drive your ambition. And I go by Ty.
I'm Mr. Fly.
And this month we are reviewing 0 Degrees of Empathy by Simon Baron Cohen. And this was my pick this month.
Yes. So, I mean, we spoke about this off camera, but it's a normal question anyway. So why did you actually pick this book? Because I'm so intrigued.
You're so intrigued.
Yeah, I am.
Not
and I'll tell you why afterwards, but why did you pick this book?
Because I wanted to learn a bit more about empathy and the meaning of empathy and what it actually means. Obviously, there's a difference between empathy and sympathy.
Yes.
And also, in terms of communication, we read a book a couple of books ago on the cultural differences and how different cultures perceive others. And communication. And I wanted to learn more about empathy and seeing things from other people's viewpoints and how that can play out in, life situations and just, I wanted to learn more about the topic.
For what reason did you want to learn more about the topic?
Because I think partly for work as well. I deliver workshops around different topics. I think empathy is such an important trait, and it can help in so many different situations. It can help with conflicts. It can help with relationships, with friendships. When you can embrace empathy and see someone else's viewpoint, which empathy is more than that, but I think it can just help everyone. It could help me, it could help the other person, it could help the clients I work with, the companies I work with. So, that's the main reason that I picked this book. This actually wasn't bought for me. I actually went online and looked specifically for an empathy book. Yeah. And this was what I found.
Okay. So, kind of off top, did you know he was Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin before you?
No.
Did you have an inkling? Because the author, I mean, I don't know much about the author besides maybe you know a bit more, but he's actually, which was just funny to me, because when I saw this, so he's Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin, who's Ali G, which is, did you know this?
No,
I didn't know. It says it in the book. Yeah, he's Ali G's cousin.
I didn't know.
So because when I saw the name, even my wife was like, is that Ali G? I said, no. Then later on in the book, he references, he goes, anyway, all right, let's get into it. Yeah. In the book, he talks about lack of empathy. Yeah. And Ali G played a character, which was kind of, he does satire, his comedy. Yeah. And it was like, that was an example of the lack of empathy, because that character, I forget, it wasn't an Ali G character, it was another character. I think maybe Borat. And then it was like, he mentioned that my cousin, quite casually in there, but I was like, okay, it's a little minor flex there. Little name
no, I didn't pick up on that. Do you know what? The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't think why. I thought maybe I've just heard of the author. Okay.
But anyway, back to the book. So do you feel that you understand empathy now?
I think I understand it maybe better, and understand why. I think I understand more why someone might lack empathy. And why someone might be more empathetic. I feel like I understood it to a degree, but seeing someone else, I could see, I now understand why you might lack empathy based on this book. I mean, I want to just touch on the start. We're not going to talk about the...
Can I define empathy first before you do that? Just let me define what... Or do you want to do it?
No, I want you to do it, because that was one thing. He took a while to get into the definition of it. Yeah. So, anyway, This was
the kind of... I tried to synthesize it down as much as I could, but he says, empathy is our ability to identify what someone else is thinking or feeling and to respond to their thoughts with the appropriate emotion. which I think that part of the appropriate emotion is interesting, because as opposed to like, all right, they're feeling this way, let me just do this.
Yeah.
Because you can still kind of tend to someone feeling in a certain way. You spoke about sympathy before.
Yeah.
So, but that appropriate emotion, which I think is kind of, that's what I got anyway. That's when I tried to drill it down.
Yeah. When I look at empathy is like not just seeing someone else's viewpoint, but seeing it from their shoes. Yeah. Because I could see your viewpoint, but from my experiences, when you explain something, to be more empathetic, I need to not only see it from your viewpoint, but from also your shoes, like your experiences. Whereas I think when we compare it to sympathy, it's just like seeing it from my viewpoint. It's like,
I feel so sorry for you.
I feel so sorry for you. Like, oh, wow, you're going through this. Yeah, I feel sorry for you. But actually, like, I'm good. Or do you know what I mean? But yeah, to just touch on the beginning, we're not going to go into it. The beginning was disturbing, man. So disturbing.
Chapter 1, explaining evil and human cruelty.
Yes. He goes on, you know, why people can be evil and inhumane, and he gives a few examples of why people have been inhumane and evil.
But he doesn't like the word evil, though. And I agree with him on this, because evil takes away responsibility from the person, I think. So he wants to replace the word evil, even he puts it in inverted commas, with like empathy erosion.
Yes.
So, because when you say someone's evil, you kind of take away all they were just born evil.
Yeah.
But if you say they lack empathy, or they were just being unempathetic, there's more responsibility on the individual who's doing whatever act they're doing. Yeah. You see what I mean? So yeah.
No. So if anyone does read this book, just a kind of trigger warning, the beginning had me like very disturbed, like extremely disturbed. I don't think I've read a book where I've been more disturbed.
Seriously.
From the beginning of this. No,
he says it like, he says, when you treat people as objects, empathy switched off. So I'll give one example from the first chapter.
Hopefully it's the same one I'm thinking.
Maybe, we'll see. This is like, maybe the soft, it's not even, they're all bad. Yeah. But this is the one that may be easiest to get into and less controversial. So he talks about in Kenya, there, you know, people are kind of living in poverty and whatnot. And there was a lady she was in a shop queuing up to get her shopping, and I think someone just cut her finger off to take her wedding ring. So in that moment, the person who's done that he's just thinking about his own situation. He wants the ring for the money, maybe to feed his family or to do whatever. So, but he's just looking at that person as an object. That object has something I want. I'm gonna take it, and I don't care about. He's not even I don't care about. It's not even a thought about what the repercussions of cutting off someone's finger is. And that's just one example. Was that the one you was going to say?
Yeah, that's the exact one I wrote down here. But
so you objectify a person.
Yeah, I've got the definition here of empathy erosion. Okay. Empathy diminishes because of a range of reasons, including fear, hatred, resentment, desire for revenge, or desire to protect. So in this situation, the guy, he might be, you know, going through poverty. It mentioned that, you know, extremely poor part of Kenya. He might have the desire to protect his family, and by that he needs money to feed. So there's a statement, it's like, you know, poor people do things in desperation because it's survival. Yeah. It's not necessarily, this guy is not necessarily a bad person, even though he's just cut someone's finger off, which is like...
In a weird way, you could be empathetic to him. Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, it's quite a deep one. It's quite a deep one. But
I think the author as well, he wants people to be empathetic to everyone. Yes. Or to understand that just because someone does a horrendous crime, that actually they have a story too, or there might be a reason behind it. There's there's something that's caused them to do it. They're not just evil, as he says.
Yeah, exactly. Just what I'm saying. Yeah. I think you just said it amazing. So,
I don't really want to go into the disturbing stories.
No, that's enough.
At the beginning. Yeah, that's...
If you want to know more, read the book.
But he does touch on, you know, working out our own levels of empathy. Yes. And I found this really interesting. because looking at myself, because I think I'm quite empathetic, but I also think you're quite empathetic.
Okay.
And I also think you're probably a bit more empathetic than me, from my perception anyway. But there's a whole list of questions that he asks.
Did you do it?
Yeah.
All right, tell them, because we know what we're talking about. Tell the people.
What the questions are?
The questionnaire.
Yeah, the questionnaire.
At the end.
So yeah. So there's a questionnaire at the end, which actually maybe if I have time, I might create a questionnaire and put it in the description. Maybe if I have time, I'll create it so the viewers. So just check the description. If it's not there, sorry. If it is there, you can.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Yeah, you're welcome. You can determine your own levels of empathy.
So he calls it the empathy quotient.
Yes.
And it's just a questionnaire. It's 40. I think it's 40 something questions.
40
questions.
Yeah, 40 questions.
And they're there to decide, to kind of see how empathetic you are as an individual, right?
Yeah. Did you do it as well?
Yeah, I did it.
Did you get your score?
Yeah.
Do you want to share it?
Yeah, so before I did it, no, I'm glad you brought this up, because anyway, so I did it. I think I'm quite empathetic. I think I was. So I'm doing this thing now, and I'm like, okay, the questions, it's ask you questions, you kind of rate the questions between one, so say a situation, like, I haven't got example.
Yeah, I've got example.
Right,
let me give you an example.
Yeah, okay.
I can easily tell if someone else wants to enter a conversation.
And they'll be strongly agree, slightly agree, slightly disagree, or strongly disagree.
Yeah.
Those are the four responses.
And then you get a certain amount of points per question based on your answer.
Yeah.
So if you strongly agree on questions 1, 7 and 4, that's 2 points.
Yes.
If you slightly agree, it's 1 point, etc., etc. Anyway, so you thought you was quite empathetic.
Yeah, turns out I'm average. So I got 43. So 42 is average for a man.
Okay.
And I got 43. So I actually think you're more empathetic than me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, according to the data, I am. Because I scored 56 out of 80.
That's high.
Which is above average on the scale.
Yeah,
and there was actually one question that I didn't answer because I didn't understand it. It was, I can't even remember what number it was. I was like, I don't actually understand how to answer this question, so I'm going to leave it. But I think this book talks a lot about upbringing as well.
Yeah.
And my mum is a very empathetic person.
Okay.
And she's obviously rubbed off on me because when I was answering the questions, it also made me think of her, how she would answer it, like our differences. But yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, anyway, if the link's in the description, good luck. But yeah, he calls that the empathy quotient.
Yeah. So
let's go into a little bit more of, the science and stuff, because there's what he frames as the empathy circuit, which is made up of a whole range of different parts of the brain, which was actually quite confusing.
Yeah. He calls it like the empathy bell curve. So it's a graph essentially.
Yeah, he got it,
Right? And then on the graph, you kind of plot yourself, you plot yourself where you kind of are on the graph, or where you are in regards to your empathy.
Yeah.
And I think things like your upbringing, like your genetic code, like your surroundings and your nature over nurture and whatnot, kind of have an impact on how empathetic you are or are not.
Yeah.
I'll find it, maybe you might have it, where he talks about, I think a lot of it is about your upbringing when you're younger.
Yeah.
And I really like this because it really was quite easy to understand. He calls it like the pot of gold. He never made this up. It was a psychiatrist or someone that made it up. It's like, I think the guy was called Bowley. I could be wrong, but it's about, you give a child that emotional and empathetic pot of gold, so when they're older, they can kind of draw from that, as opposed to not being able to draw from that in certain situations, which allows them. So using your mum as an example, your mum kind of gave you that pot of gold that now as a man, you're able to kind of draw back on that, and it's kind of helped shape you. So there's something there to draw from, basically, because, let's use that example of the person with the cutting their finger off for the ring. If you didn't have that pot of gold, if that was you, because of that pot of gold you've got, you might be like, you know what, that's not the way to feed my family.
Yeah.
That's not the way I'm because I don't want to bring pain. That person's now you'll start thinking about the other person.
Yeah.
They're gonna have no finger and they might die and they might have a husband, or all that kind of stuff is gonna come into your mind. So, and I really that resonated with me because it made sense. Obviously, I work with young people a lot, and you see the results of for various reasons of the lack of that,
Yeah.
you know, the results that has and how that plays off, and that can even pass on. So yeah.
What was very interesting about the empathy curve was how important childhood how much of your childhood could have an impact on your empathy curve, on how empathetic you are. And in fact, we'll come on to like the 3 types that he talks about. He talks about borderline personality disorder, which is called negative B. He talks about negative type P, which is a psychopath, and then negative type N, which is someone narcissistic. And I guess we'll touch on each 3 points. But the stats around childhood, he said 60 to 80% of borderline personality disorder suffered physical abuse as a child or growing up, and 40 to 70% suffered sexual abuse. So it's like some people might be a certain way. They might be, like come across narcissistic. They might be horrible. They might be rude. But actually, maybe they've learned that from their childhood.
It's not even, it's the circuit. It's like how it's your brain development as well. Do you see what I mean? Where it's not just like, if you don't have the capacity to actually respond in an empathetic way, it can be, because I was talking about this, I mean, with my wife, I was like, with psychopaths, and I was like, okay, this actually kind of, if they don't even have the facilities to not be, or do you know what I mean? Obviously, you're trying to unlearn it, but if your brain is developed in a particular way, that's because of these things you've been through, you know. So that was quite, it's interesting because it kind of, I was like, okay, so again, maybe that's me being empathetic to that person, you know, to someone, and you know, psychopaths and they're violent and things they do. It's like okay, there's maybe more. Again, that's why this word evil, you just, well, he's evil, she's evil, full stop. Whereas, okay, there's more, there's so much more to it, but the evil kind of caps it. So that, you know, the brain development, how your brain actually develops as a child into your later stages, and even in like when you're a teenager or a young person and whatnot. So that was really interesting.
I think this book made me perhaps more empathetic to someone who, you know, is maybe a criminal or someone who's rude or someone who's done horrible things or, you know, bad things. It's made me think about, what got them to that point? Like, rather than just thinking you've done something bad, actually, why did you do that? Why did you get to that point? What struggles have you personally experienced? It's very.
But I think that's the natural. I think that's a good thought process. Do you know what I mean? Because you're not just like, there's more than, you can't just judge, you know, regardless, people do horrendous things, we know, but there's a reason, you know? So it's not making excuses for people, it's just understanding that there's a reason, and that's a fact. You know what I mean?
When he talks about the empathy circuit, I'll give some science, which confused me because there was a lot of abbreviations. I mean, there's a list of them. Anyway, was the first region in the empathy circuit is the medial prefrontal cortex, which is thought of as a hub for social information processing. So he talks about the prefrontal, can't even say it properly, prefrontal cortex a lot in the books, and how that plays a part in how empathetic we are, whether we've got that empathy erosion or not. And there was actually an example of someone who had an accident. Phineas Gage, his name was, and prior to this accident, he was polite, he was friendly. It's appeared in the book, you know, people liked him, his friends, family, and he was a nice guy. But after the accident, he went through a rod, which went through his skull. He obviously survived, but it damaged his medial prefrontal cortex. After the accident, he was still able to function normal in, whatever normal is.
Day to day.
Yeah, day to day. He was still able to function day to day, but he had lost his empathy, and he was like more childish. He was rude, and he showed like lack of social skills after the accident, simply because that had damaged his medial prefrontal cortex. And it's said, I think he touches, it's not until the age of like 25 until your brain is fully developed in those areas, which is why you kind of possibly see young people do certain things. Yeah. And you think, why would you do that? Yeah. But
even when you look back on yourself, like as a younger man, do you kind of...
Absolutely. You look back on your younger self and think like, I think most people look back on their younger self and think, well, now you wouldn't do that. When you're young, you don't necessarily think about other people and what happens to them. You just think about you. Like, I don't know, you go to the corner shop, you want some sweets, you got no money. Oh, I want sweets. Like, you're not thinking about...
The shop owner.
You're not thinking about the consequences.
And you're definitely not thinking about the shop owner that's trying to feed his family and whatnot.
Exactly. So, definitely that was interesting to put like a number on it. Is like 25 is the number that your brain kind of fully develops.
It must vary from people to people, but I think that's the average maybe.
Yeah, definitely varies.
Again, due to experiences. Did you want to speak anything about that?
No, go for it.
So, the zero, because you touched on it already, the chapter 3, when 0 degrees of empathy is a negative. And the reason when he phrased it like that chapter, the next chapter is when 0 degrees of empathy is a positive. And I was looking forward to get to that one, but I just want to talk on this. So you spoke about borderline. Did this like, taking the psychopaths out of it, because I don't know anyone that's a psychopath. But this made me like, it really made me think about people that I know.
Yeah.
And some people where I know their story, and some people I don't know their story, and some people I know parts of their story and whatnot. Just like on my own personal life, not from like a working perspective, just my own personal life, and even myself. And I was like, it was with like the borderline and the narcissist. They were two, like they were really. I find that really interesting. Yeah. Just like more because he told a story I'm talking about the borderline now, and he's told a story about. It's like a case study of someone that he used to work with, but again, or someone that was a client of his.
You're talking about Carol?
Carol, yeah. Yeah. But he muddles the story up, so it's not like an exact story, but she went through a lot as a young person, and in her adult life as well. And her response to her kids and her partners at the time was, oh, get out of my life, I hate you, you'd be happy if I killed myself. This sort of language, and she would lash out on people, but she's also dying for connection. And I was like, it sounds like a struggle, man, because you would kind of think like, I don't know, but some people might think that being empathetic is like a negative thing because you're thinking too much about other people. But this person, was it Carol? Yeah. Like her life just sounded like it's quite, always that insecurity of like, and that anger, and to the people you love, you're pushing the people you love away the most. So I was like, that was just, it was like, so that and the narcissist one was quite interesting. And again, talking about the reasons about the pot of gold stuff. Yeah. Want to add anything?
Let's touch on Carol because she's the type of person, she comes across as horrible. The world is always out to get her. She says hurtful words to her children without even thinking of the consequences. She then expects her children to apologize to her. She is verbally abusive in relationships and antagonizing. So she sounds like quite hard work. She sounds like a horrible person when you look at the surface of it. But then when we look at her childhood was full of neglect. She had a mum who showed no love to her. Her mum sent her to boarding school and didn't care for her at all. Even when she come back from boarding school, her mum wasn't necessarily looking after her. And her childhood was full of neglect and no love. So now, as she's grown up as an adult, that's what she knows. So she maybe she's trying to do what she thinks works, but as us, we're looking at that like this woman has a borderline personality disorder. There's something wrong with her because
he says here, so early deprivation and environmental factors negatively affect the brain's development, probably permanently. So that's kind of, again, going back to early development, the stuff with her upbringing. And, and it's funny because I was speaking to someone who's like she works in schools with some private schools and some boarding schools. And then she mentioned that You know, because we kind of think, you know, you look at these private schools, especially in this area, there's a lot of private schools, and the perception from the children that don't go to the schools is that, oh, their life is so much better than mine, X, Y, Z. Now, it's give and take, because she was saying to me, some of these boarding schools, the parents just leave them there for the whole year. So, you know, when everyone, think about that, like, and everyone's going back home in summer and stuff like that, they don't go home. So that's a whole different kind of like scenario. So that could bring on, I'm not like, I don't know about that, but do you know what I mean? Like, who knows? Maybe he would say that could bring on that sort of personality disorder. Yeah. So yeah, man. Yeah, it's just an interesting read.
It was interesting, and it made me. I mean, I couldn't think of anyone that's like Carol, like in my direct people. But if I did encounter a Carol, I would think I'd feel a bit more empathetic towards them. After reading this book, I would think, oh, rah, like, they might be horrible, but they're probably...
I think you would think that anyway, before. I think you would, honestly, like, before reading this book, I think you would already kind of be... Maybe,
but maybe I'm more aware of it now.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm more aware that I would think that after reading this book. Yeah, so that's one type of empathy erosion.
Or zero type of... 0 degree.
The positives, I didn't make note on the positives. Did you?
Yeah, I did. It's just another chapter, but quickly, just so, because the book's called 0 Degrees of Empathy. Yeah. So just what he means of 0 degrees of empathy means you have no awareness of how you come across to others, how to anticipate their feelings or reactions. It leaves you feeling mystified by why relationships don't work out and create a deep-seated self-centeredness. So that's kind of, that's kind of the essence of what he thinks of 0 degrees of empathy. So that's kind of what he's trying to explain in the book. Just want to get that out there. So yeah, he talks about when 0 degrees of empathy can be a positive. So that's like, so in those situations, again, having BPD or being a psychopath or narcissism can have negative effects on your life and the life of those around you. So, but he also kind of says having 0 degrees of empathy, because of the brain and how your brain functions, how it can be a positive. It can be a positive. So he talks about like people with like Asperger's to some degree, and autism and whatnot, and then how they are able, because of the way their brain works, how they're able to systemize things. And he uses as a very crude example of like Rain Man, even though they're doing something illegal. In the film Rain Man, obviously they're like counting cards, but because of their ability, because of the main character, I forget his name now, Dustin Hoffman, because of his ability to kind of systemize things and understand patterns and whatnot. So obviously they're using it in Rain Man to count cards, but in real life, you know, I think I watched a documentary one, there was a time a person with autism, and they worked in a post office or something like that, because they were able to recite all the roads and everything like that. And even it made me think, a young person I used to work with a long time ago, he was autistic. And if you say to him any album, he'll tell you the day and the year it came out. It was so like, you know, I can't, you know, my memory's terrible anyway, but like, he was like, you know, say this young person, when this album, Reasonable Doubt, he'd be, 1996, this date, it's so, he can just give you the stats. Do you know what I mean? So that's a positive, that's a positive. So do you remember anything else about that chapter?
Yeah, the systemizing curve.
Yes.
I do know, I did make some notes on it. But yeah, there was levels to it as well, level 1 to 5, and it kind of, level 1 to 6, and it kind of gave you an example. So level 1, do not care about patterns or systems, and those at level 6 can look at one pattern at a time. Those that can look at one pattern, you can only look at one pattern at a time, So it explains why some with Asperger's or autism, if their day is usually like this structured way, if there's any changes, it throws them off, because they're at level 6, because they can only look at one pattern at a time. It has to be breakfast, shower, whatever pattern they have. But now if I have my shower before the breakfast, that's thrown me off completely. And it's quite interesting looking at that curve, because I was thinking, like, also just like, where am I on the curve? Because we're all on that curve, because one is you don't care about patterns, so you can literally, your life can be quite free roll, quite flexible, which I definitely don't feel like I'm a level 1. So I was looking at myself and thinking, like where I am, I think I'm a bit higher, but definitely not obviously at the top.
Yeah, so you got one, obviously one and then people at 6 do have autism. So it was like, the upside of being a 6 is that you notice patterns no one else does. Then the downside, like you said, any change is very hard to cope with unexpected change.
Yeah.
Then also, which was, and again, it's how you can systemize it. This kind of made me think about the Big Bang Theory, actually, about, you know, Sheldon.
Okay, yeah.
So like, so you talk about affective empathy, which is so I forget the definition.
I've got a definition.
Oh, yeah, please give it, thank you.
So, because he talks about the difference between affective empathy and cognitive empathy. Oh gosh, man. Anyway, let's touch effective empathy. Effective empathy is the ability to feel and share another person's emotions, experiencing their feelings as if they were your own.
Yes.
Yeah, and then cognitive empathy is the ability to understand and intellectually grasp what another person is feeling without necessarily feeling those emotions yourself. So affective empathy is like, once it's been highlighted to you that someone's sad, you now feel sad for them, like you actually really feel that sadness.
Yeah.
Cognitive empathy is like, you can see someone's sad, but you don't necessarily care. Like you understand fully that they're sad, but without the effective empathy, you don't care. Whereas if you have the effective empathy, you can't even see that they're sad. You don't even know they're sad. But once you're told they're sad, now you're like, oh, are you all right? Blah, blah, blah. So it's saying, like, we're jumping around a bit, but those with Asperger's and autism, they have low affective empathy. Sorry, they have high affective empathy because they can actually feel sadness with someone else, but they don't just necessarily recognize it, they don't understand it. Whereas the psychopath has low because they don't care. But they have high cognitive because they're fully aware that you're sad, but they don't care. Your sadness has no impact on them.
No, but that's where he talks about with like Asperger's and autism, they're able to systemize it. So now you've made them aware, they would know, because they've systemized it, okay, if somebody cries, that means they're either upset or happy. If they're unhappy, let me offer them a coffee or let me offer them a tea. So they break it down into a system. So they kind of, and again, so yeah, that was a good chapter of like how, you know, what do you say here, zero positive is a special case where empathy is compromised, but pattern recognition and systemizing are enhanced. So it's like a give and take, and it just shows that, you know, it's a good way to, you are able to function to some degree. So yeah, that was, like, I liked those two chapters. I like the fact they were both together. And again, it kind of flipped it because overall, I think he's saying that 0 degrees of empathy is kind of like a negative thing, but it can also be a positive thing.
Yeah, it can have its positives.
Depending on how you feel. Did you like, was there any other chapters that you...
Yeah, I mean, I was still I know we jumped around a bit, but like, you know, touching on the psychopath and the narcissistic, because he mentioned, you know, a psychopath called Paul, and he literally said, someone in a bar was looking at him funny, so he bottled him, which we shouldn't laugh. But it's like, it's funny because like someone else thinking like that is funny. It's like, I don't understand it. It's because you can't understand. Yeah, you can't comprehend it. Someone was looking at funny, right? Bottle him. Like that's the logic behind it. It's like it's a bit mad.
There's a step in there. There's a few steps in there. Again, so this is what you talk about when you're looking at it, like the brain function. Well, how do you get there? Like someone looks you funny, violence. How did we get there? So I mean, it's like, what happened in the middle? Do you know what I'm saying? So,
and then after, he said, the guy deserved it. That was it. That was his justification. Yeah, he deserved it. When people bullied him back in the day, they weren't sorry. Why should he be sorry? So now we understand, oh, wow, actually, he's been through some hard times. He's been bullied. He's been through, all these horrible times. So now he's inflicting that on other people. Like, in the definition, it said about revenge, when I wrote down, what the definition was. Yeah, desire for revenge, empathy erosion.
Yeah.
So in this instance, you could almost say it's desire for revenge. He wants revenge on the past that he's had for people bullying him.
He's trying to get his own back.
Get his own back, even though the person's probably innocent.
It's got nothing to do with that, yeah. So I think, again, he talks about when psychopaths do like an MRI scan, it's actually abnormalities are seen in the empathy circuits in their brains. So again, talking about what he's been through, so using that person as an example, what he's been through has affected or impacted how his brain development.
Yeah. What it says here for psychopaths is how your mother or father treated you turns out to be very important for both the development of healthy empathy and for the risk of becoming zero negative type P, basically becoming a psychopath. So how your parents have such a big influence on that, how they raise you, which I found this interesting, like from I'm not a parent, but from a parental point of view, it's like, wow, you have to be careful raising your children because
it's that pot of, listen man, it's that pot of gold theory, isn't it? Like, which again, I think people kind of understand. We understand at a low level.
Yeah.
You know, we understand, but it's actually when you look at the extremes it can go to.
Yeah.
You know that, well, not neglect or that nature versus nurture, because we won't go into it now. But he talks about, you know, the empathy gene genetically.
Yeah.
Are some people more genetically predisposed to being empathetic or not? But I think he wraps that up by saying you can't blame zero empathy solely on genes or environment, because there's so many other factors. So you can't just say, well, his environment was this or her environment was that, or well, the parents, or there's a gene for this or whatnot. You know, there's so many factors. It's kind of nuanced.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, let's touch on the narcissist quickly.
Okay.
1% of the population are type N, narcissistic, and he talks about James. And when I was reading this section, it made me mad because I'm like, you entitled little, that's what I thought, you entitled little, like, he goes to restaurants, demands the best table in the restaurant, doesn't care who's sitting there, I want this, expects to get what he wants when he wants it. Just gave some other stories like that, and it just made me, like, I don't know anyone like that, but that just was like very, like, they're frustrating. It was like, in my understanding of empathy, I wasn't so empathetic to that character. But actually, to go on to it, they're not malicious or dangerous, whereas the psychopaths can be malicious and dangerous. Narcissistic, not necessarily malicious or dangerous. I don't know what you've
with that, it's just, I spoke about like states and traits, and that's kind of overall. So you can be in a state, so if you're like, a state of being unempathetic. So let's say if you're drunk or tired or hungry or something like that, you know, that can bring out, and he talks about that more around the narcissist, but it's like your state can change your empathy or how empathetic you are. But then again, the trait, some people like narcissists have that trait in them where, because if you're in a state where you're being less empathetic, and then as you say, if you're tired, and then when you get a good night's sleep, you might wake up and think, oh, yesterday, man, I was a bit harsh on such and such. Let me apologize, or let me just try and make that right. Because that was the state I was in at the time. Whereas if you're like a narcissist, that's just the way you are. It's that kind of traits in you. So you've got those traits that kind of pull out that sort of behavior.
That's deep, man.
There's a lot, man. There's a lot to go through.
He gave stories about animals, like our animals. And
what did you think about that?
I found it quite interesting.
Do you think they are?
Because I guess, like, without looking at the book, you look at a dog. If the dog sees that you're sad, a pet dog, it often will come up to you and just comfort you, or, you know, depend on the dog, but
that's true.
But it will often come up to you and comfort you. So, and he gives examples. There's an example of chimpanzees helping each other. For example, chimpanzees were observed helping each other climb over the wall, climb over a high wall.
But then again, sorry to challenge that, but he says, like, is that to do with trying to help the pack survive or trying to help the troop survive? Because that's the kind of thing, it's like, you know, that's a good example, but that's just let's keep our genes alive, let's keep the team together. So is that not necessarily empathy? That might just be like, I don't know.
Survival.
Survival, yeah, survival.
Yeah.
The one that got me from that though, more so, was when he talks about when two chimps have had a fight.
Yes.
And then the one that loses, other ones go to comfort them or try and help them, lick their wounds and stuff like that. So that seems, I mean, you could argue both. You could still argue that
for survival.
Survival, yeah, exactly. But it's interesting.
I found it interesting. Yeah, the loser gets consoled by the other chimpanzees. I thought, the animal kingdom can be kind, even as cruel as it can be, right? Yeah. It can be kind. It also mentioned about monkeys pulling a chain to get food. Yeah. This is why I thought they are empathetic. Mm. If the monkey pulled the chain and knowing that another monkey will get an electric shock, they didn't pull the chain. So that is empathetic, but again, you just threw a spanner by mates. It could just be survival.
It's nice to think about it. It's nice to think. But yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. Earlier I touched on, the adolescent brain not being able to be developed by 25, and he touches on that within a story in the book where a girl lured her boyfriend to take the life of another girl because she was jealous. Yeah. Because she was jealous, she got her boyfriend to take someone else's life and withheld sex from him. And when he went and did it, took the other girl's life, she then was like, oh, you did that great. Now she gave him sex. And I think she was 15 at the time, and 2 years later, she still felt no remorse. And it was just interesting to think like, okay, is that because her brain's not developed, or because of her brain not developing and also her, her upbringing?
It's all of it. Yeah, it's all of it. Again, it's all of it.
Yeah, is there, how difficult did you find it to read? Let's go into difficulty rating.
Yeah, difficulty rating, I'll give it a 2.
2?
I didn't find it difficult at all. It was, no, that's not true, because I'm focused on the bits that, see all the stats that he went, let me push that up to a 3, because he went it went too sciencey at some point, man. I wasn't interested in that, and I didn't, he went into it, the abbreviations and this and that and the brain function, but for me, that didn't, so that made it quite difficult.
So 3.
So 3, yeah.
Yeah, for me, the sciencey stuff was so difficult because I was going back to look at what the abbreviations were, and so I'm going to give this a 4 because I actually found it quite a difficult read because of all the sciencey behind it. Star rating.
Star rating, I will give this. It's a very strong 3. Okay. It's a very strong 3. Interesting to know. Again, it's more about life because the reason I was interested whether you wanted to read this for business or whether it was just your own, but you answered that question. So, but yeah, for me, it's a 3. Yeah.
I want to increase after this conversation because it's been so good and it's reminded me of the bits that I loved about the book. Okay. But again, because of the difficulty and the sciencey, it made me lose interest in the book while I was reading it. It was more like I was just trying to get through the sciencey bits, which then took away from the rest of it. So I gave it a 2.5. Okay. But the bits that I loved. Yeah. The other bits were like, just
didn't take nothing from it.
Well, I took from it, but it just was sciencey, and it was hard to understand because of prefrontal cortex, whatever.
No, it was quite technical, man. Yeah. To be honest, with that, I read it, but I just don't even bother trying to take it. I just literally cool and move on. Yeah. But I agree, it was hard. I didn't enjoy that.
Yeah. Didn't love that. Well, next book we have The Talent Code. So. Buy this book, the link's in the description box, and join us on our book review journey. This is The Power of Pages.
And we review books.